Hey, Ned, I am super psyched for this series that we're going to kick off here. We're going to do 3 episodes on storing binary data in DNA. How cool does that sound?
I think it's fantastic, Mark. I've been looking for the next frontier of storage density and perhaps durability for storage. And DNA seems like it shows a lot of promise.
Yeah, so DNA, our species has been using it for well over 50 years now to propagate. There's an interesting phenomena. DNA is a quaternary storage system. So it has 4 states, whereas in binary we only have 2, 1 and 0. So it's got pretty good density. You can store lots of goodies with 1 bit. So the idea behind using DNA for binary data storage is we've got these machines called synthesizers that are able to basically print DNA in any sequence that you want. And the really cool thing about it is DNA is dense. How dense, you ask? Well, millions of times denser than the theoretical maximum on magnetic storage. We're talking millions and millions of times denser. So, like, to put this in perspective, check this out. By 2025, it's estimated there'll be 175 zettabytes of data in the planet. We're talking cat videos, everything. If you stored that in DNA, you could do that in this great big booger of about 23 centimeters, about the size of a basketball. That will be all the information humans have ever created in history and up through the year 2025. That's an incredible amount of density.
Yep.
But DNA's got another advantage to it, and that it's super durable. A bunch of Canadians were running around the Yukon territories and they found a horse. This horse had just been revealed from the thawing permafrost. So they find this horse. They actually date it 700,000 years old, and they were able to produce the entire genome from it. So obviously a horse buried in the Arctic tundra is not under the best conditions. So DNA is like mega durable. Another thing, right now, DNA speed, density, synthesis, sequencing, all of that is actually maturing at 3 times Moore's law. So Moore's law, for those of you that are familiar, says that if you're ever married to Bruce Willis and divorce him for Ashton Kutcher, you're going to regret all of your marital decisions. That's the demi-Moore's law. But this is a different Moore's law. This Moore's law says that computing will double every 18 to 24 months. This is doubling 3 times faster than that. So DNA research is on fire right now. So long term, there's some really cool advantages to DNA.
Today, I was describing what storage was and the growth in storage density to my 10-year-old, and I was trying to figure out an analogy of trying to explain to him why data is growing. It's something as simple to understand for everyone as being able to take pictures at a higher density or a higher bit rate on your phone.
You bring up an interesting point. In storage, they've got this thing called Kreider's law, a corollary to Moore's law. Kreider's law says that the density of storage doubles every 13 months. Except over the last decade, Kreider's law has kind of like tailed off. We're at about 16% growth a year, which is nowhere near what it was back in the good old days. It's one of the reasons that is forcing us to look at alternate methods of storing data. Now, DNA is awesome, right? I mean, it's got all these great, wonderful things, but there are some big challenges. The throughput right now is we're like in the 9600 baud modem era. For those of you who don't know what a 9600 baud modem is, you're just going to have to go and Google it and be amazed that the human beings that had to use these invented space travel and digital computers and the internet. It's amazing we got anything done at all. The other thing is noise. I mentioned this earlier. Whenever you're making big, long strands of DNA, even as living organisms, errors pop in. And I think that when you take a look at DNA, it is not as binary 1 or 0 as binary, there are some mutations that creep in. Therefore, you have to put a bunch of, think about it as biological parity bits that you got to stick in there to make sure that the noise is accounted for. Cost. This stuff costs an arm and a leg, even more than synthetic meat right now, right? This stuff is super, super expensive. Another problem, DNA is meant to be accessed in one of two ways, either all at once, like mitosis, where you have a DNA strand that separates itself and then wham, it just picks up all of the amino acids and proteins it needs to replicate the whole megillah, or sequentially, one by one by one by one by one. One is super fast, but you get everything. One is super slow, but you get what you want. This makes random access, stuff like searching, going to the letter M in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That makes that a little bit problematic.
I think that there is a lot of cause for optimism here, because we're seeing great economically viable use cases for these techniques. And again, I want to come back to this notion of uptake of mRNA vaccines. So mRNA isn't just for COVID vaccines. It could be used for anything that you want your body to do differently. And there's a lot of promise for that. So there's a lot of likely economic benefit from doing it, which means there's a lot of likely research into how to get things printed, the substrates used, the way to move it around, everything else. And so I think we'll see a lot of good uptake in it.
Yeah. Absolutely the case. So wait a minute, you're saying there's still a chance for me to make it into the NBA?
I think there is, Mark. I think there is.
The dream's gonna happen.
With that twinkle in your eye, nothing's impossible.
You know it. You know it. You know it. Hey, Ned, we're back. We're ready to pick up our story with using DNA as binary storage. And this episode, we get to talk about something I know that is near and dear to your heart, the Stanford Bunny.
Mark, I have to tell you that of all the things that I've learned from you, the Stanford Bunny may have been the most deceptively simple example of something that I care about a lot. And I wonder if I could get you to share what the Stanford Bunny was with all of our friends here who might be listening to us today.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, for all of you animal activists out there, let's just start off with a disclaimer. This is not about some lab bunny that horrific things happen to. That's not what this is. In 2019, a couple of material scientists studying at Stanford evidently had way too much time on their hands. And what they decided to do is take the 3D printing instructions for a bunny, and they sequenced it in DNA. They then were able to suspend that in distilled water, throw it into an aerosol form, and used a technique that produces these things called nanobeads. It's where you take a cold liquid and molten glass and you aerosol them in these little tiny beads that are about a micron in diameter. But inside each one of these little beads is this distilled water with DNA suspended in it. And the DNA has got the information for printing a bunny. Now, what they did with all these nano beads is they put it into molten plastic, fed that into a 3D printer, and printed a bunny. Ned, I think you've been playing around on your 3D printer with the Stanford Bunny, right?
Well, so what Mark is describing is this is a Stanford Bunny. And this is not a Stanford Bunny that has been imbued with all of the DNA for its subsequent copies. But I was able to go to the internet and download the file that incorporates the design, the CAD design, and then print it on my printer this weekend while I was doing science stuff. You said that you could take the various thread from it, get the design, and then have it printed again some huge number of times. That boggled my mind.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like a little Franken bunny. You take your handy dandy pocket knife, cut off a little piece of plastic from its ear, melt it down, take the nano beads out, run it through a sequencer, and you could get the printed instructions for the rabbit you just had. Now, that's a great and wonderful example, but check this out. So we talked about suspending nano beads in plastic, right? So what happens if you did that, let's say for the wiring harness in your fridge? Such that, the wiring harness, my fridge broke. I take my grandpa's pocket knife and I get a little piece of that plastic and I run it through a machine, which would be able to take the nanobeads out, get the DNA, and print a replacement part. So we talked about plastic, right? But certainly you could use this in paint. So at the
Mhm.
scene of an accident, the detective pulls up a fleck of paint and gets the VIN number of the car that did it. I understand there's like some big brother ramifications in all of this, but nonetheless, I mean, that could be super handy. Or you're redecorating your room, you take a fleck of the old paint and it's got the recipe for Home Depot to mix you up a new gallon. I mean, there's just 1,001 things, and it's really exciting. And I am so psyched you printed out a Stanford Bunny. That is like the highlight of my month. There's another one that we were talking about the other day. We are talking about DNA spray, right? Because you can put this into an aerosol. You could literally spray DNA onto stuff, and
Mhm.
I'm not entirely sure why exactly you'd want to do that, but I don't know. Maybe you want to walk around smelling like Brad Pitt for a day. I don't know.
Or what if you bought an expensive piece of jewelry and wanted to make sure that it was the real one and that it was yours? This is my custom ring or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
you might just say, this is mine. Or the whole idea of products, like if you buy an expensive handbag, it's very easy to get counterfeits that look really
Yeah.
real. And it's very difficult to tell them apart. Or Cuban cigars. If you buy an expensive handbag for your wife or girlfriend, you can often get one on the side of the street that may have fallen off of a truck that was leaving that same factory. So do you know if it's a real one or not? How do you know?
Well, I've done some reading of a gentleman who was talking about the application of nanobeads with DNA for the exfiltration of information. So if you wanted to pass let's say, the cavity search when leaving an autocratic country, and you happen to have a contact lens in that had nanobeads suspended in it with all the missile launch codes, so look for that in your next James Bond movie, right? That's gonna be Q's new invention, right? Is gonna be
Ooh, I like that.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be a contact lens. It could be anything though, like your glasses frame or whatever. Anything that you're taking, spray it on your lens like a lens cleaner. There you have it.
So where does all this go in the future? Well, there are a number of companies right now and some terrific research. I got to give a shout out to the folks at Columbia and the University of Washington. And they really seem to be kind of on the edge of this technology called lab on a chip. The idea here is much like we've taken and putting a camera on a chip. Can we actually put a lab on a chip to where we can synthesize or sequence DNA and just basically have these big drip IV bottles that are pumping in all the goodies. Yeah. By the way, if you work in the lab on a chip industry, you know that that's not actually how they do it. But that's how I envision it.
So, Mark, the lab on a chip thing, though, isn't far away from what the mRNA people say that they're able to accomplish. They had the COVID genome sequenced after 2 days. And all of the delay in getting the vaccine out was just figuring out how to manufacture it at the right cleanliness at scale for the fluid that carries it into your body. It had nothing to do with the mRNA stuff. So as that comes together faster, manufacturing the stuff, you'll be able to start to see things for your body very quickly, and you won't have to go to a lab on a chip. You'll just go by the Moderna offices and have that superpower that you've been looking for. Maybe it'll fix my myopia.
Yeah. You know what? The Warriors are going to get one hell of a point guard in about 3 years. That's all I'm saying.